The older we get, the faster time seems to pass. One day, we'll look back and realize that decades have passed in the blink of an eye. Within 66 years, we went from inventing an airplane and flying for the first time to building rockets and walking on the moon. Within 37 years, we went from the internet being an obscure tool to share research information to an everyday, all-purpose instrument with over 4.5 billion users worldwide. Within 22 years, smartphones went from having just internet access and a few single-purpose apps to being able to perform nearly every function we might need on a day-to-day basis, not to mention skyrocketing from about 1 million users to over 500 million users in only 6 years. The faster technology grows, so too does the number of now abandoned communities that sprung up throughout the ever-shortening lifespan of digital trends. And because of that, internet archives are the best time capsules we've ever invented. So, this was originally supposed to be another Exploring Internet Graveyards video, but this one website had so much interesting content that I decided to focus the whole video on it. One really unique counterculture that took off in the 90s was vampire communities. Between 1995 and 2010, there was a rise in forums, blogs, and chat rooms full of people who claimed to be vampires. Early on, this popularity probably came from Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Vampire the Masquerade, before Twilight put the mainstream spotlight on it. One such website was sanguinarius.org. It became a popular place for that community to gather. The first thing you saw was a mission statement and a brief description of what the site was about. Vampires unite, strength in unity. The foremost real vampire information and resources site on the net. Resources for the vampiric community. Vampire support page. Real vampire directory. Vampiric community events calendar. Sanguinarius on IRC. Articles. Guide, tips, advice. Problems, and much more. For sanguinarians, psi-vampires, and vampiric people. Below that was the option to enter. Awaiting me was this blood-red homepage with fairly standard web design for the early 2000s. I noticed a page titled Introduction that visitors were encouraged to read, so that's where I headed. I was a visitor after all, from the future. Welcome to Sanguinarius, the vampire support page. The purpose of this website is to give support and guidance to those individuals who find themselves having to deal with the condition commonly referred to as vampirism, and to bring the vampiric community closer together. If you are saying to yourself, "Real vampires? What the heck?" then you probably don't have any use or need for this page. This page is an attempt to reach those certain individuals who may be looking for a specific type of assistance, support, etc. If you feel that you are one of those certain individuals, then you have come to the right place. Sanguinarius does not deal with fiction, folklore, or role-playing games. If that's what you are looking for, then you'll need to look elsewhere. I don't have anything against vampire lifestylers. They are welcome here too. I navigated to the frequently asked questions section and went to the one titled, "Are you really a vampire?" The answer seemed to be a yes. They were not superhuman or supernatural or undead, as media would have us believe, but simply an ordinary person with a need for blood. And this got me thinking because I'm not familiar with this community. Maybe something had led members of this community to believe they had clinical vampirism, also known as Renfield syndrome, a psychological obsession with drinking blood. By all accounts, clinical vampirism is a fictional disease. and neither that nor Renfield syndrome have ever been listed as a valid diagnosis in medical practice. But I'm not a doctor. I decided to keep going because you get more out of life with an open mind. Another one of the FAQs was titled, "Why do you knock Vampire the Masquerade?" For those who don't know, Vampire the Masquerade is a tabletop RPG, later turned into a video game, where players can roleplay as members of several different vampire clans. Each clan has vampires with different powers and appearances based on real-world influences. The answer to that question was essentially that it made vampires mainstream. A lot of the terminology used by the game had been picked up by vampire fans, and that led to people joining their community who were simply interested in vampires and were not vampires themselves. They also explained that, despite their criticism, Vampire the Masquerade was preferable over other vampire-related media. Since this FAQ mentioned terminology, I figured it was a good time to check out this website's terminology and lingo section, which was helpfully pinned under the Information and Support tab on the sidebar. It took me to a glossary with quite a few words I've never seen before. Some were related to vampires, others were not. One interesting word I learned was porphyria, a skin condition that caused pale, flaky skin, which the site owner suspected was the explanation behind historical accounts of vampires. Other highlights included sangomancy, which was the practice of using blood in rituals, sanguivore, vampires who consumed only blood, whereas sanguinarians, like the name of the site, had other means of sustaining themselves, and twoofing, a flare-up of blood withdrawal symptoms such as changes in heart rate, breathing, and thirstiness. That's also a funny-sounding word in my opinion. The next section I looked at was Guide, Tips, and Advice. The first category, Vampires and Blood Matters, focused on safe and ethical means of acquiring and using blood. A reminder was posted at the top of every page. Humans were not to be viewed as cattle or to be ruled over by those who were vampires. Quote, "You are not better than they are, just different." The articles also advised that everybody that a vampire took blood from should be a consenting adult, as well as tested and sanitated so that neither party caught any diseases. And oh man, that last updated 21st September 2003 makes a nostalgic chill run down my spine, because as of me writing this script, that was almost 21 years ago to the day. In the page titled Dealing with Bloodthirst was a list of tips on how to keep yourself sustained while also keeping your hunger and thirst in check. A few of the solutions were to consume chocolate syrup, red Gatorade, and rare steaks. One of my roommates back in college had that exact diet, so maybe he was a vampire. I don't know. Another article linked further down recommended exercise and meditation as well, which is generally good advice for everyone. Affecting the taste of blood and cooking with blood were about how to properly season and prepare dishes with blood. There was also a recipe for a Polish duck blood soup. Considering that pork blood soup and duck blood soup are staples of Chinese cuisine, both of which I've had and consider delicious, it sounds like a legitimate recipe. The next category, general health, medical, and physical comfort concerns, was self-explanatory, and it had a handful of healthy lifestyle tips that were good for, well, pretty much everybody, vampire or not. Don't stay out in the sun for too long, and use sunscreen and sunglasses if you do. See a doctor if you feel ill. You know yourself best, but let them offer their thoughts and diagnoses. Garlic is good for you. It'll lower your risk of heart disease, as well as your cholesterol levels and blood pressure. Eat a healthy and well-balanced diet. It should include fruits, veggies, carbohydrates, meats, and dairy. Chew your food thoroughly and don't eat too fast. Exercise regularly. Aim for 30 minutes to an hour of physical activity at least 5 days a week. Going for a walk is the most accessible way of doing this. I thought it was strange that a site for vampires was recommending garlic, because I thought garlic repelled vampires. So I looked it up, and turns out it sort of does, but it's not to vampires the way kryptonite is to Superman. I learned that the strong smell of garlic repels mosquitoes and bats, two other creatures associated with blood-sucking. The origin of vampires hating garlic probably came from that connection. It also makes sense because popular media depicts vampires as having more acute senses, including smell. The next section, Vampires and Psi Matters, was where it got more interesting. One article covered the different types of vampires out there. There were blood vampires, shortened to blood vamps, who relied on blood. Think of the stereotypical, traditional depiction of a vampire. But there were also psychic vampires, shortened to psi vamps, who didn't need blood to survive. Instead, they drained the life force from their victims and partners to sustain themselves. The article talked about how every living thing on this planet was made up of this life force, and that the force of humans was a higher quality than that of other life forms. This probably took inspiration from the concept of qi, which is widespread in Asian medicine. It's a type of energy that runs through every living thing. Next was donors, as in blood donors, not money donors. The articles recommended seeking out close friends and family who might volunteer, as well as asking around at the local goth, scene, and kink communities. The article, titled Advice to Donors, simply said, make sure to eat healthy. The category called Seekers was about finding and approaching vampires, while the next one, called Social Matters, covered navigating society as a vampire, including coming out as one and how to handle treatment from non-vampires, which was often expected to be ridicule and ostracization. The site also had an entire catalog of articles that went into extensive detail about vampirism. A few standout titles were Hypothesis on Vampires, Advice to the Newly Awakened, Coping with Fatigue, The 4 Stages of Dealing with One's Vampirism, Addressing Psi-Vamps and Bipolar Disorder. There was also a page called Problems Vampires Have, which was a list of user submissions about challenges they had to deal with. A few common ones I saw were curfew laws, fatigue during the day, hot areas like Texas and the southern US states, and bright lights. Another page called Fun Vampires Have logged the fun, mischief, and entertaining shenanigans that the vampires in that community got up to. Next, I looked at their events calendar. They seem to have had a vampire get-together every Tuesday. There was also a page with vampiric community graphics, but unfortunately most of them weren't archived and it just showed a missing image. I also tried accessing their message board, but I couldn't make an account because the service they used to host it wasn't available anymore. And of course, a site with such a unique and strong sense of branding like this would have had a merch store. They sold pendants, candles, CDs, and even hardcover books. I could be wrong, but I looked at the URLs of the book pages and it seemed like they were directly sold on the site and weren't affiliate links to another site like Amazon, which is pretty cool. They must have worked something out with the authors. The site, as we've come to know it, was up until late 2022, after which it went down. I tried looking into where the site creator was today. I found a user on X with the handle SangiVamp, who claimed to be the webmistress of sanguinarius.org for real vampires. She was based in Arizona and was decently active between June 2009, when she joined, and November 2015, when her last post was. During my research, I found several people claiming that she had passed away since then. Later versions of the site did mention declining health, but with only a username and alias to work with, I couldn't look for an obituary or anything like that. I did come across someone named Amy multiple times on that site, but I think that's a different person altogether. If the sad truth is that Sanguinarius, or Sangi, really did pass away, I wish peace and strength to her, the ones she loved, and the ones who loved her. This was probably one of the most unique and memorable websites I've ever looked at. I also wish the best to any members of that community who are still active on the internet. Horror and pop culture are so deeply intertwined that when one changes, the other will always react. This website and its community were one example. Another is the sinister reputation that has grown around allegedly one of the most haunted college campuses in the US. Check out my deep dive into the horror phenomenon that is Room 428 of Wilson Hall, the Devil's Dorm, here. Thank you for watching.